from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello and a warm welcome to Cross Question. This is the first of our 3 Cross Questions this week and indeed every week in the future. Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesday at 8 o'clock you can hear our panel take your questions. Let me introduce you to our panel tonight. Diane Abbott is former Shadow Home Secretary. She is a senior Labour MP. Brandon Lewis is the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Conservative MP for Great Yarmouth. We're also joined by Polly Toynbee, the Guardian journalist, and Sarah Vine, the Daily Mail columnist as well. They're here to take your calls. You can, of course, watch us live on Global Player, on the LBC YouTube channel, Facebook feed or Twitter feed. Do join our proceedings right now because we are live on all of those mediums. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
And we only have a month to wait until we can welcome people back into the studio. I'm really looking forward to that. But in the meantime, welcome to you all virtually, it has to be said. Let's go to our first question. It's from Alex in Totteridge. Alex, hi, what would you like to ask?
I would like, good evening rather. I would like to ask why Britain and international community have ignored Belarus dictatorship and the atrocities that the regime is committing all the time. Now he's hijacking the planes. What's next?
Do you welcome the reaction from the British government today?
Yes, I welcome the Dominic Raab's statement in the House of Parliament, and I'm grateful for British reaction. So I think that more sanctions and British government has got all the appropriate information, all the companies, all the people that are connected to the regime, but they're sitting on it rather than acting upon it.
Okay. Brandon Lewis, this Alex has got a point, hasn't he? We've acted quite toughly today, but why haven't we taken tougher action before?
Well, I think actually we've had some sanctions on the regime for breaching human rights. We are working, of course, this is an international issue. We work with our partners in the EU and international partners to have a joined-up approach to this. But it's absolutely clear they've got to be held to account for this. And I know even today, even with the airlines, Grant Shapps has made the statement that he wants to make sure we keep passengers safe, and that's why we're requesting airlines avoid the Belarusian airspace, and he's suspended their operating permit as well.
Do you think that there ought to be more concerted international action? I know the EU has been meeting today. I don't know what's come out of that meeting yet. But in a way, one country taking action on its own isn't going to be very effective, is it? It's got to be concerted international action. And now leaving the EU has maybe weakened our position on that.
Well, no, I wouldn't agree with that, Ian. I mean, look, yes, the EU obviously have been meeting today to discuss what action they can take, and obviously our teams are talking with them as well as other international partners, across the world, globally, as Dominic Raab himself has outlined. So we do take, and I do agree with you, is something where you have to try and coalesce an international approach to these things. We've seen how, as a country, we can do this very, very well. In fact, when we had the situation with Salisbury, it was the Prime Minister, when he was Foreign Secretary, worked with countries around the world to get a united response to that situation with Russia, with the diplomats. So we can do that as a country, and I think one of the things we do very, very well is work with our partners internationally, and I think this is a good example of a situation where it needs that a cohesive approach across a range of partners around the world.
Polly Toynbee.
Yep, I agree with all of that. Absolutely sensible. We have to work very, very closely with countries inside and outside the European Union to deal with these big international crises. I think, the idea of a no-fly is very important, to put as many sanctions on as we can. The linchpin here, of course, is Putin. The question is whether he will rein them in at this point, whether this air piracy is just a step too far, even for him. And although they've said lots of ludicrous things today, maybe, just maybe, this is, a ludicrous off the range, off the radar regime. Maybe Vladimir Putin will quietly discipline him and bring him back within some sense of legality. But it's a pretty depressing position.
Sarah Vine?
I don't think we can expect much from Putin. After all, he's quite good at sort of invading other people's jurisdictions and poisoning people or doing whatever it is he wants. I mean, this is the problem. You're dealing with people who are completely outside the sort of normal parameters of civilized behaviour. I think that we can. I agree with your caller. I mean, I mean, I must say, I'm ashamed to say that I hadn't realised how bad the situation in Belarus was. And this is partly because, this chap who's been detained is very young. He's 26 and his girlfriend is 23. And this is obviously a very young, quite sort of internet-based movement. And I think sort of old people like me perhaps don't quite understand how it's all been working. They formed this group that have been trying to subvert, the regime through the internet and through various channels. And I think that, we all have a sort of duty to try and know more about it. But I do think that there's, I think that we can't expect Putin to do much because he never takes responsibility for this kind of thing.
Diane Abbott, it is actually an opportunity for Putin, this, to maybe bring Russia back into the international fold. But the reaction from Moscow today was effectively to laugh about it and say, oh, well, of course, the West did this 10 years ago with some Bolivian president. I have to say it's something I don't recall. But Putin never seems to take an opportunity that's offered to him, does he?
No, he doesn't. But I really am amazed that Belarus thought it could get away with plain jacking. And although Sarah's quite sceptical as to whether Putin, and yourself, as to whether Putin wants to do anything, you really can't have the international rules-based order turned upside down. And we do have to look at Putin to try and rein them in, because this is bizarre. And if they will plain jack out of the sky, what won't they do?
Exactly. I think you're completely right, Dan. It is really, I think it's crossed the line, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
Well, this is amazing. An Abbott-Vine axis already started on this programme. But Diane, was there anything... Well, indeed. Was there anything this afternoon that you thought Dominic Raab could have announced, could have said that he didn't? Or was this one of those occasions when actually the whole House of Commons comes together?
Well, it was one of those occasions when the House of Commons comes together, which, I mean, sometimes the House of Commons can be quite tedious when it does that, but I think we were right to do that today. But there's not much more, to be fair, there's not much more Dominic Raab could say without a kind of international consensus. And I imagine, I have no idea, it's not my government, I'm not a Tory MP, whatever, but I imagine they're talking to allies in the EU and talking to Putin to try and get some agreement on how Belarus can be reined in.
Well, I think the headline out of this exchange so far, Diane Abbott reveals she's not a Tory MP. Alex in Totteridge. Now, you obviously would like the British government to say or do more. Is there one thing in particular you think they could say that they haven't said so far?
Well, we are thankful for the actions. Britain was actually first, together with the United States, with Canada, leading the process, and I would love for the situation to continue. And you have a chance to do practical things, because once again, Foreign Office, British government has all the appropriate information where and how people, they have properties. People linked to regime, they have flats in this country. There are businesses registered in this country, and it's time now for the government to act.
Some Magnitsky sanctions, Brandon Lewis, maybe.
Well, I think, look, the team and Dominic Raab's team will be, exactly as Diane was suggesting, talking to international partners and working across, this is one of those ones, not just in the House of Commons today, but I think across this conversation, all of us here in exactly the same place. We've got one of the things with this is it's that challenge of we all want to respond as quickly as we can, as strongly as we can to get movement, to get the right outcome. actually is right that the international partners, obviously the Foreign Office and the team working with international partners, work together to get an outcome that actually can deliver and hopefully make a difference. And sometimes that does mean we need to take a little bit of time, not too long, but as we've shown before as a country, we can work with partners very well around the world to get an outcome moving forward. So that the teams will be looking across a whole range of measures that both we can act on, but actually what can we do with international partners to show an international response to this? Because if we, as you sort of alluded to, I think in the opening comments, and as Alex, I think, made the point in his initial question, if one country does something, it has a limited impact on one country. So if we can get that united position of everybody putting up a very clear position, not just a strong reaction, but a set of actions that can create outcomes that actually make that country and that regime think twice, not just about doing this again, but also rectifying the bad decision they've made this week.
So you're supportive of international law now?
I've always been supportive of international law, and if you remember what I actually said...
we can think of one occasion when you maybe didn't.
Let's be clear. I was asked a question, would something break international law? And I gave a straight, honest answer, which is yes, it would. The reality was that was a matter of fact rather than an opinion. But as I say, having the international partners coming together to create a set of actions or a situation that puts the pressure on jointly shows a strength of partnership across the international community that I think is important in a situation like this, because this is, as Sarah rightly said, this is not something we can tolerate. And there is another issue that all governments are having to get used to, which is online media and online actions and speakers and journalism. You don't react to it by bringing down an airplane to arrest somebody. That is just not how these things work, apart from issues around free speech.
Brandon, we can hear that you're incredibly popular because you keep getting notifications while you're speaking. If you could mute them, that would be much appreciated. I think it's you anyway. It may not be.
No, I think you will.
Right. We're going to go to a slightly early break, and then we've got a really, really interesting question coming up in a moment with our panel: Diane Abbott, Brandon Lewis, Sarah Vine, and Polly Toynbee. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's Cross Question. It's 14 minutes past 8.
LBC at 3. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
17 minutes past 8. If you'd like to put a question to our panel, the lines are still open. I have one space on the board, 0345 6060 973. Time for our next question from Aaron in Cheltenham. Hello, Aaron. What would you like to ask? Oh, it's a text. Sorry, I misread that. Aaron says, tomorrow marks 1 year since George Floyd was murdered. How has the world changed since then? Let's go to Diane Abbott.
Well, I think one of the important things about the Black Lives Matter movement was that it brought together a lot of young people, both black and white, who were concerned about racial justice. It was almost a new generation of people with those concerns. Now, has things changed vastly since the death of George Floyd? No, but I think that the mobilisation, as I say, a younger generation of people of all colours coming together to challenge racial injustice is very hopeful.
But what has meaningfully changed? I mean, there were big protests, which, bear in mind, during COVID, that was something to note anyway. But what has changed? Do you think things have changed in people's attitudes over the last year, that people who maybe haven't thought about these issues very closely have started to think about them a little bit more?
As I say, I couldn't point you to concrete things that have changed, whether it's policing, whether it's education, whether it's things like black women and maternal health. We have a much higher death rate in pregnancy and maternity than other women of other ethnicities. So I can't point you to anything concrete that's changed, but I think there's the potential for change. And I think people who may not have addressed these issues before are addressing them now.
You tweeted something earlier today, which you've come under a lot of fire for on Twitter, when you tweeted this. Black activist Sasha Johnson in hospital in critical condition after sustaining a gunshot wound to the head. Nobody should have to potentially pay with their life because they stood up for racial justice. Now, you've linked this shooting to racial justice. Even people who were witnesses are suggesting it was a gangland killing. Haven't you actually inflamed racial divides by tweeting something when you hadn't done your homework?
No, I mean, you didn't see the commentary on this woman being shot in the head. There was a huge amount of concern about it, not just online, but in the papers and the media. And she is a black activist. She was shot in the head, and people were concerned as to why. And if you raise issues of race and you're accused of inflaming tensions, that doesn't really get us anywhere fast. This woman is a mother. She had a bullet in the head. We need to take that seriously, not try and deride people who mention it.
Well, we absolutely do need to take it seriously. But if it's a gangland killing, if it was an accidental killing, which is what people who witnessed it seem to be suggesting, and she isn't dead, and let's hope she survives. But just by plainly linking it to racial justice, you are creating a division there when you don't know that that's true.
No, I think it is so wrong to accuse people of colour who raise issues in relation to race of somehow inflaming feelings. We don't know, actually, whether it was a gangland killing. It may have been that she randomly took a bullet, but we don't know for certain. Nobody's saying
exactly, which is why you shouldn't have tweeted what you did.
Yes, but when you accuse people of colour of inflaming feelings because you raise issues about race, as I say, that doesn't take us anywhere.
Sarah Vine.
I think the thing about the question was really about George Floyd and about the anniversary. And I think what happens with situations like George Floyd is that initially they push everyone apart and everyone becomes very polarised. But I think over time, I think they bring people together again. And I think what's really interesting is that lots of people are having a more grown-up debate about this issue, which is a really important issue. And I think that, certainly, as Diana says, among the young people, it's become a much more talked about situation. And these are good conversations to be having, because I don't think that it is the case that there is not a problem. I really do think there is a problem. And I think that unless you're, for example, I have a friend who's married to a man from Nigeria, and she is white English, and she has mixed race children. And what you don't understand until it happens to you or your child is what the culture is like. You know, her son gets called a monkey, and he's 11 on the football pitch, and he's a really good little football player, and he gets called a monkey pretty much every week, and pretty much every week nothing happens about it. And you know, the kid that does it doesn't get sent off. Nobody says anything. No, the parents go all embarrassed and they don't talk about it. And for that boy, every time he gets called a monkey, that's another bit of his identity that is being mashed at, you know? And, you know, no one's ever done that to me. No one's ever said anything like that to me. No, well,
they've said plenty of other things to you.
They have. I have been called a spag because, of course, I grew up in Italy, so a spag is a spaghetti. But it's not. It's not the same. You know, it's not the same as get called a dirty Italian every now and then. But the point is, I think that we all have to try and understand what that sort of influence does to somebody, and if you sort of extrapolate that across the whole population, I do think it's a good conversation to be having. That said, I'm not a great fan of Black Lives Matter because I think they're the sort of sharper edge of the debate. And I'm a person who thinks that you get a lot more done by being sort of collegiate rather than being divisive, and I do think they are. I do think they sort of sometimes deliberately set out to be quite divisive. But I think that the answer to the question about the George Floyd thing is I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, and I think we are having it, and that is a good thing.
Okay, Polly Toynbee, you've written a lot about this over the last year. Do you think anything meaningful has changed?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think every time there's a new wave of awareness, whether it's about Me Too and feminism or whether it's about Black Lives Matter, it pushes the subject ahead. It makes some progress each time. I think Black Lives Matter, those demonstrations have been amazingly uniting and not divisive. You've seen so many white kids out there just as passionate as black kids. It hasn't been, actually, the demos that I've seen haven't been racially divisive in the way that, you know, you might think it would be. So I think that's been very encouraging. A poll's coming out tomorrow from Ipsos Mori on the anniversary of the George Floyd murder, saying that you know, the majority of people in this country think more needs to be done. Only, you know, a small minority, 17%, thinks that we're doing enough. And even of Tory voters, 40% think more needs to be done, and only 25% think we've done enough. So I think these things every time open people's eyes. They hear stories, I mean, like the one Sarah's just told about her friend. These come to the surface and people say, what, 11-year-old kid being called a monkey and nobody called her out, the referee didn't send him off? That's outrageous. I think those things bubble up and do make a difference. I also think within organisations, it's given organisations a big fright. They've suddenly been looked at the snowy white peaks at the top of their organisations and thought, good God, we haven't been promoting people from ethnic minorities. We must see what we can do to harm more people, bring people on, encourage people, train people up, and so on. So I think you've seen quite a lot of turmoil inside almost any sizable organisation to look at themselves a bit more carefully. That's good.
Brandon Lewis, how have things changed in government? I mean, this is something that you must have clearly discussed around the cabinet table.
Well, I think as Polly and Diane and Sarah have just outlined, I think one of the biggest changes, and one of the things we recognise and was in the review work that Karen Abbott led, was this. What I think has changed and is there is a much wider recognition and understanding of what's going on. I think the discussion that's been had, the shock that people had last year with what happened to George Floyd, actually I think was a bit of a wake up to people who just didn't appreciate that this kind of thing in a modern progressive society could occur and could happen. And I think that the embarrassment that could happen at all has got people talking and discussing things. And I think actually Sarah's just touched on something I've seen too many times and I think has been a real challenge in the past, and hopefully is starting to change, but I think we're very much at the start, is the ability for people to effectively call things out, like Sarah outlined the experience on the football pitch with that young man. We all know that in schools and sadly in sports fields across the country, things happen, whether it's about racial abuse, whether it's sexist abuse or any other kind of abuse. I think there's too often an issue where people are too embarrassed to raise it. They worry that by raising it, they identify themselves as being part of a problem. I think sometimes the organisations, the institutions are so fearful about their own reputation that instead of dealing with a problem and building their reputation on doing the right thing quickly and effectively, they try and deal with things internally, which means that it doesn't quite necessarily get hidden, but it kind of feels like that. And I think having a much more open discussion and recognition of this gives more people the confidence to step up and call it out when they see it. And I think actually Polly's also right. I think not just across race, but also I think across sex as well. There's been a bit of an awakening over the recent period about people looking at those hierarchies around who they've got in their organisation, how you engage with things, and are you engaging with people properly and correctly across a wide section of society. That's certainly something I think has changed over the last year or so. I think that awareness and recognition and desire to discuss it is a really positive step forward, because I would hope that our children, would deal with people as they find them, not based on what they have preconceptions about, or on race or on sex or gender, etc. And I think that discussion over the last year.
Go on, Polly.
Can I just ask you a question, Brandon? A little bit facetiously, but I like what you said, and I like the language you use. And you said it was a wake-up call, and then about women, you said it was an awakening. Is that the same as being woke? Because Sarah's pages of people. I asked Stuart and I was going, I'm not having any of this woke stuff. Do you call yourself woke, Brandon?
Well, it's probably easier for others to judge, but I don't think it is woke if you're just being aware of what's going on around you. I have to say, I think one of the challenges in society more generally, actually, and one of the things I pick up in my constituency and with people I talk to in Northern Ireland and across when I'm travelling around, is I think the woke thing is a problem. I wouldn't want to be thought of as woke in the sense of, I think we should all be able to have a conversation and talk about these things and actually get it out in the open. I don't think that's being woke. I think that's being aware of what's going on.
All right. Time is running away with us. I want to give Diane the final word on this, because Brandon says something there about sort of generational change. And I think it is partly this, sort of the younger generations coming through, and I think attitudes change in all sorts of ways, whether it is to do with race, sex, or being gay, all those things. But there is a role for government here. What's the one thing that you would like the government to do that would actually provide some meaningful change, Diane?
Well, I just want to quickly respond to Sarah, who said she didn't like Black Lives Matter because it had a bit of an edge to it. I think in these matters, race, feminism and so on, you need people with a bit of an edge. Stops people like me falling into middle-aged complacency. But what's the one thing... As if. What's the one thing that government could do? I think government is a very big employer in this country. And actually, you can go into government departments and government agencies and see those white snowy peaks, which Polly referred to. And I think government could do more as an employer to have fairness and justice for people that work for them. That's what I would say.
OK, well, thank you all very much for those answers. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:31 on LBC News Headlines with Serena Farrow.
The Belarusian journalist who was arrested on board a Ryanair flight which was forced to divert yesterday says he's cooperating with investigators. In a video on social media, Roman Protasevich says he's being treated correctly. It's thought the government will miss its target for publishing details of plans for social distancing in England. The Prime Minister had promised a review before the end of May, but the rise of the India variant is likely to delay it. And a gas explosion in a street in Lancashire which killed a toddler was caused by a cut gas pipe inside a house. Officers say it's now being treated as a criminal investigation. LBC weather: showers in the south easing tonight, but continuing in the northeast. Chilly as well. Skies remaining clear though, with a low of 5 degrees.
LBC.
I want to
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:35, you're listening or watching Cross Question on LBC. Our panel: Diane, Abbott, Brandon Lewis, Sarah Vine and Polly Toynbee here with me until 9. There hasn't been as much disagreement as you might have expected so far, but that might change in the next question. But let me tell you who we have tomorrow. Simon Heffer, the Telegraph columnist, Yasmin Alabai-Brown, the social commentator, Rebecca Long-Bailey, the Labour MP, and Tobias Elwood, the Conservative MP. So join us at 8 for that. Our next caller, Bob, is in Tewkesbury. Hi, Bob.
Good evening, Ian. My question is it time for the UK government to honour its stated policy and recognise the state of Palestine?
Polly Toynbee.
I don't think that this government should do anything that will exacerbate the situation. We should be throwing all our weight we possibly can, and that means working very closely together with friends and allies to influence both sides as much as we possibly can to get back round the table. It's appalling that Netanyahu has abandoned the two-state solution, which of course Donald Trump abandoned as well. It is the only long-term solution. Everybody knows it. And to simply weigh in on one side at this stage seems to me not helpful. One doesn't want Netanyahu to win. He's been a very bad influence and very bad for Israel's future. So one doesn't do anything to strengthen his hand. Go carefully on everything to do with the Palestine question. But yes, of course, great sympathy for the rights of Palestinians to have a country of their own. But that means they have to accept that Israel has a right to exist and be a country of its own too.
Sarah Vine.
I'm really sorry, but I agree with everything Polly just said.
Iain is across with us.
I always like to have consensus, but on a subject like this, I really didn't think there would be. But hey, carry on, Sarah. You agree with Polly as much as you like.
Right. I think it's an irresolvable situation, unfortunately, and I think that that you just want to pour as much cold water on it as you possibly can in order to stop people from dying. I'm sorry, I know that sounds that's just how I feel. I mean, I think that I think the way that the conflict is spilling over onto our streets in sort of terms of kind of anti-Semitic stuff, and I think that's all very ugly as well. And I think people need to sort of I think we do need to make sure that it doesn't infect our society. It's an ongoing long-term problem, and I do think Polly's right. I think the two-state solution was the right one, and I don't understand why it's been abandoned. I really don't. I can't understand why you wouldn't all just agree to move forward instead of just being so entrenched in these endless kind of toxic relations, which is what seems to me to be happening. And this is going to happen forever and ever. It's going to flare up and it's going to calm down. It will flare up and calm down, and more people will get killed and more people will be miserable, and we'll all sit around stroking our chins trying to work out what to do about it. And the problem is that it's an intractable situation, but we should not make it any worse.
A friend of mine has just WhatsApped me and said, this is more like don't get cross-question rather than cross-question. Diane Abbott, should the British government recognise the state of Palestine?
Of course. Parliament voted to recognise Palestine, and we should do this. Our colleagues on the panel have spoken about a two-state solution, but we actually need to take concrete steps towards a two-state solution. The international community needs to halt the settlement building. What has happened with settlements being built on the West Bank and in Gaza, it's going to make it really impossible to have a separate Palestinian state because there are so many of these illegal settlements threaded through those territories. We need to take concrete steps towards a two-state solution. We need to stop selling arms to Israel. And Polly said we don't want Netanyahu to win. Now, there is an argument, I'm not putting that argument, there is an argument that the recent sort of warfare between Israel and Palestine helped him. He was in a very difficult situation domestically, and of course with this war he's been able to consolidate his position. So yes, we should recognise Palestine.
Brandon Lewis, I'm going to assume that you're going to say no, we shouldn't, because it's not government policy to do so. But with your experience in Northern Ireland of having to keep the two sides of the political debate on side, what lessons are there from the experience in Northern Ireland that maybe we can learn on Israel and Palestine?
Well, I mean, I agree with quite a lot of what's been said. Again, as you say, not so much cross-question today, but Polly's points and Sarah's point as well. And I think that is something you see from Northern Ireland in the sense that the only way you can move peace forward, and if you look back to the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the only thing that started to bring that together was people coming together and talking. International partners obviously played a part in facilitating and nuancing some of that. And I think, again, the international partners can work together on this. The government's position on this is clear. Ultimately, I think Polly was also right that Palestine obviously has to recognise the rights of Israel as well. But one of the things that Northern Ireland shows,
but the Palestinian Authority has done that, hasn't it? It's Hamas that doesn't recognise Israel. The Palestinian Authority has.
Yeah, and our position hasn't changed. The fact that although we do believe in a two-state solution, I think Polly's point around the timing is absolutely right. And James Cleverly himself said at the dispatch box, the timing at the moment isn't right for all the reasons that Polly was outlining. And one of the things we've seen consistently over the years in Northern Ireland is that the only way you can move forward with these things isn't through violence. It is through people coming together, talking, and actually recognising each other's viewpoints. It's one of the big things that shifted in terms of what allowed the Belfast Good Friday Agreement not just to be formed, but to have now lasted some 23 years, is no matter how difficult things get, that people come back and focus on having a diplomatic conversation rather than resorting to violence.
Bob in Tewkesbury, what's the answer to your own question?
Ian, I'm really disappointed what I've heard. We spent the first part of the programme rightly talking about the need to uphold international law, rightly to defend the rules-based order, rightly to point out Putin's actions, and rightly to justify isolating countries that flout international law and ignore the will of the international community. All of those points are applicable here. All of those points are relevant. And we have a situation where Brandon has just said it's not now. Over 50 years of occupation. 50 years, that's nearly 2 generations, nearly 30 years since the Oslo Accords. And you rightly pointed out that the Palestinian authorities have recognized the state of Israel. Absolutely. And yet, we're listening to a panel on a UK show saying now's not the time. It's really important to understand.
To be fair, Diane has actually said.
I know Diane has, but I expected Diane to say that, and credit to her, she's consistent with her messages. But it's no surprise. People are seeing these double standards, and so that despair then goes into other directions. You just have to see that what was happening in Jerusalem. Everyone talks about the rockets and the dreadful situation that happened in communities in South Israel also fleeing. People forget what happened was happening in Sheikh Jarrah, what was happening in the Al-Aqsa compound, what was happening in the streets of Jerusalem. All of those things seem to happily are airbrushed away.
All right,
to ignore
Bob,
that is a fundamental part of this conversation.
I'm going to be accused of airbrushing now, but we do have to move on. Thank you very much for a really good question. Keith in Rickmansworth is on the line. Keith, what would you like to ask?
Good evening to you all. Given that Jeremy Corbyn was made to face his electorate after only being a year in office, despite his popularity, wouldn't it be reasonable to expect Keir Starmer to face an election from his electorate, from his membership now?
Diane Abbott, I don't know if you're familiar with Keith in Rickmansworth, but let's put it this way. He's on your side of the debate. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because he's right. Jeremy Corbyn did face a leadership election very, very quickly. Should Keir Starmer now face the same?
Well, it was actually hugely disruptive, the attempt to mobilise a coup against Jeremy Corbyn less than 12 months after he was elected. It didn't do the Labour Party any good, actually. In terms of having a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer, you wouldn't expect me to say that would be a good thing. However, were we to lose in the forthcoming by-election, I'm sure it would be on the table.
But Labour lost a similar by-election in Copeland in, 2017, only I think the third time that a government had won from an opposition. I don't remember you saying that Jeremy Corbyn should quit or be ousted in those circumstances.
I didn't say that Keir should quit or be ousted. All I was saying was...
You more than hinted.
No. I wasn't saying he should quit or be ousted. What I'm saying is that if he were to lose 2 by-elections in seats which historically were left-of-centre constituencies, the issue of a leadership challenge would be on the table. That's just common sense.
And would you support it?
We're just going to have to see what happens in Batley and Spain.
Well, I'll take that as a yes. You said nice things about Andy Burnham in an article I read not that long ago. Why did you do that?
Because I ran against Andy Burnham in 2010 for the leadership.
I remember.
And well, I'm glad you remember. Not everyone remembers.
Well, it was because you were all in my studio.
Yeah, but what I was commenting on is how, to an extent, Andy Burnham has reinvented himself from then. In 2010, he was very much a new Labour guy. The only thing that singled him out from the other three new Labour guys, there were the two Miliband brothers, there was Ed Balls and there was Andy, and they were all completely interchangeable. The only thing that singled Andy Burnham out was his long, dark eyelashes. And what he's managed to do...
Diane, so shallow.
I know, I can't help it. But what's interesting is he's managed to reinvent himself as some kind of northern insurgent. And, the polls and the bookies and everyone is saying that he's the most likely person to succeed Keir Starmer. So I'm just commenting on that.
Brandon, I'm trying to look at your eyebrows, but I can't see that far. Do you think Labour needs to get a new leader?
I'll measure the eyelashes later, and I'll tweet some measurements. No, I think, having been chairman of the Conservative Party, that as we went through a leadership election, I think it's. I'm not going to give a particular view or comment. I will let Labour suffer in their own pain over the situation. I think they should be much more focused on what is it that led to the results that we saw in May, rather than me commenting on Keir's future. Look, as I say, what I've seen in Great Yarmouth from when I won the seat in 2010 all the way through, and what I've seen when I visited constituencies across the country that have moved away from Labour, is a frustration that Labour isn't talking about or delivering on issues that matter to people, and we are. And they see the Prime Minister at the moment focused on the issues that matter to them, getting things done. And I think that resonates with people, whilst, in Labour they seem to just want to have an internal navigation exercise. And
I read today the Prime Minister's writing his book on Shakespeare at the same time as being Prime Minister, but the media can get things wrong, I guess. Sarah Vine, I don't know if you've had any table talk about Boris writing the Shakespeare book at all, but what do you think about Keir Starmer?
I think that people can get very obsessed with the leaders of parties, especially when they're in opposition. And actually, I think it's about the team that you're putting forward as an alternative. And if you chop and change your leader every 5 minutes, it doesn't necessarily make it any good. Unless the Labour Party have got someone materially better than Keir in the offing. And I know Diane has high hopes for the gentleman with the long eyelashes. I don't think there's any point in them having any sort of, basically, unless you've got an absolutely sort of stonker of a leader waiting in the wings, don't do it. Just stick with what you've got, because it's a hugely disruptive process, as Diane says. And it's just, I think Keir is a bit of a disaster, if I'm perfectly honest. But it would be nice to have a slightly punchier opposition, just in order to keep our lot on their toes. Because, you don't want them sitting around writing books about poets when,
Polly Toynbee, are you seduced by eyelashes, or are you a woman of substance, as they say?
Well, I'm a great admirer of Andy Burnham, eyelashes and all, yes. But it would be entire madness for Labour to go through this all over again. The moment Diane said that the other day, my heart sank. I thought, this is appalling. The truth is, Labour is in a hole. It is in a really bad and difficult position. But that was kind of inevitable, because where we were at these recent local elections this month is peak Boris. This is Boris at the top of his game, where there is a vaccination euphoria. People are so thrilled that they are being set free. They're about to hug your grandchildren, meet in a pub or a restaurant, opening up. It's all you hear anybody talk about. You listen in a bus or on the tube, all anybody talks about is which vaccine did you have, and when are you getting your second jab, and are you thinking about a holiday? This is the state of the nation at the moment, and Boris Johnson has benefited enormously, but it's not going to last, because this levelling up stuff is a load of absolute hot air. There'll be one or two eye-catching projects, maybe a useless bridge. He's good at useless bridges. He's not good. When you look at the amount of money they're going to spend, it is an 8% cut in every department, bar 3. That's what the Red Book says at the last budget. You can't level up on more cuts and more austerity. And when people finally twig that, when they find there's nothing there, Keir Starmer is a very solid, safe pair of hands, the sort of person where people say, why were we fooled by this trickery of Boris Johnson's showmanship? Actually, if you want someone who's not a showman, Keir Starmer is a pretty solid guy, a decent and worthy guy.
Brandon Lewis, you're itching to get in. 30 seconds.
Yeah, just 30 seconds. I think that just completely underlines the mistake that the left make in terms of how they assess things. People do care about, if there's a new bridge that helps them get somewhere quicker, it works them. They're seeing schools being built up, they're seeing hospitals being refurbished. Yes, they're seeing the vaccine rollout. And Polly's also fundamentally misunderstood the reason why the PM is popular. It's because he connects with people. They can see that he cares about what they care about, and they're seeing it demonstrated in delivery. And that is where Labour are so busy talking about Westminster bubble stuff and not focus on what people care about seeing happen in their local communities.
All right, quick word from you, Keith.
Well, basically, I think it would be absolutely correct for a leadership struggle to emerge from this. And I can think of two candidates immediately.
Go on.
Richard Bergen and Dawn Butler.
Well, there you go. I'm tempted to come back to you all on those two, but I'm going to resist temptation because we're running very late. Keith, thank you very much indeed for your question. It's 8:52.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:55. I'm going to ask my panel to keep the answers brief now so we can fit two questions in. Martin is in Harrogate. Hello, Martin. Fire away.
We have Lord Dyson's report involving Martin Bashir and the BBC. How could Brandon Lewis and the government ensure that this never happens again?
Well, the BBC have announced an editorial review today. That's what always happens in these circumstances. Announce a review, kick it into the long grass. Is that enough? Diane Abbott, let's come to you first.
I think it's right that they're having a review. I think what Martin Bashir did to Princess Diane and her family, in fact, was appalling. But I'm very worried about long-standing enemies of the BBC, some of whom I saw in the chamber today, who are going to use the Martin Bashir scandal as an excuse to defund, attack, and deconstruct the BBC.
Brandon Lewis, that is something that we've seen from the right, particularly on Twitter over the past few days. This is giving anyone who wants to abolish the BBC or defund it the excuse to put those arguments forward again. What do you think the BBC should be doing?
Well, I think we've got to let them do this review. I agree with the caller. It shouldn't be a review that takes too long. They've got to look into this. I think they need to be seen, and I think for their own trust and future, they need to be seen to move effectively and efficiently. We'll see what that comes up with, and then I know Oliver Dowd and the team at DCMS will be working with them and looking closely at that. But I think we've got to let them do that work, and I think the BBC is a really good institution for the United Kingdom. Its reach through the BBC World Service and things overseas is something we should be rightly proud of. But we've also got to make sure they're holding themselves to the right standards, and where there's been a problem like this, that they are learning from that quickly, putting things in place to ensure that it can't happen again. So we need to see what comes out of that review that they're doing, and hopefully it's something that won't take too long.
Sarah Vine, isn't this a storm in a teacup? It's something happened 26 years ago. There have been lots of changes in BBC editorial procedures since then. It's just an excuse for papers like yours to do page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, slagging off the BBC.
I think you could say that if it weren't for the fact that Martin Bashir was rehired by the BBC in 2016, despite the fact that they knew exactly what had been going on. So I don't think the problem has been resolved. I think it is endemic. I think there is a culture in the BBC. And the one thing I would say is that I love the BBC, and Britain without the BBC would not be, as far as I'm concerned, Britain. I grew up without the BBC, and I can tell you it's not a nice place. Silvio Berlusconi's Mediaset is not, what you want to have in your life. You want the BBC. So the BBC now needs to sort its house out so that it can carry on being the BBC, because the more it doesn't, the more it just gives fuel to the fire of people who want it gone.
Absolutely.
Well, at least Italy managed to win the Eurovision Song Contest. I suppose there's something in that. Polly Toynbee.
Britain's new point tells us a bit about where we are, how we're viewed in the world, but that's another
We
matter.
might come on to that in a second.
One of the things that is really admired about Britain in the world is actually the BBC. It costs the same as an aircraft carrier, and you might think it's about 3 billion. What best conveys our influence around the world? I think the BBC does more than anything else you can think of, whether it's through the World Service. It is envied. I mean, as Sarah says, you look at countries like Italy with Berlusconi's appalling television. It's hugely envied, and it's now under mortal attack. Of course, it's got to put its house in order. Will all news organisations always make big and terrible mistakes? Yes. Will there always be some rogue journalists? Yes. Journalism is a scoop-hungry, dirty business. Almost every respectable news organisation everywhere in the world has had a scandal at some point or other, including, New York Times, everybody else, Pulitzer Prize winners who turn out to be frauds and cheats. And the attack at the moment, and when you look at the Sunday papers yesterday, and indeed Sarah's paper, the absolutely toxic attacks on the BBC, determined to pull it down. It's in the middle of a licence negotiation. It's lost a third of its income, had cut by George Osborne since 2010. Licence negotiations going on. Boris, during the elections, said he wanted to abolish the licence fee. The BBC is in great peril, and if people really, really want it to survive, that includes Sarah and everybody else, they're going to have to stand up for it and fight. Because it looks, when you hear Priti Patel yesterday, as if it's in real danger of being cut off at the knees by this government.
I think Tim Davie is doing a good job. I think Tim Davie is doing a good job, and he was the person who instigated this review. And I think,
We are almost running out of time, but we have just time for a text question from Tracy in Sunderland. It reads thus. We got 0 points in Eurovision this weekend. We've already left the EU. How else can we respond to this outrage? And who should represent us next year? Sarah Vine, I'm coming to you first on this.
Frankly, the last thing we want to have to do is to host the Eurovision Song Contest. So I'm delighted that Italy have won and that we don't have to do it. And I consider it a badge of honour that we got 0 points, because it's a terrible competition. and the music is awful.
It's fabulous. How dare you?
That's my quick answer. You want a quick answer?
I do want a quick answer, but who would you like to represent us next year?
I don't know, whoever's the worst possible singer we can find. The worst one we can find, because we don't want to host it. It's a nightmare to host.
Brandon, she's obviously heard you sing. What's your
I was just going to say, Sarah's putting me forward there. I'm not a big Eurovision fan, actually. I have to say, I think the best description I've seen it was the Will Ferrell film recently. But in honour of having the best representation next year, and that this is your show, obviously it should be Cliff Richard.
Absolutely right. Diane Abbott.
The last British Eurovision Song Contest that I can remember was Sandy Shaw with Puppet
You've
on
got a very long memory.
Well, exactly. I'm also quite
That was
old.
1967, for goodness sake.
One that really impacted me. Maybe we should have somebody who's popular now. I don't know, Ed Sheeran.
The thing is that, can I quickly say something, which is that the Europeans have a proper process for choosing their person. So their person has gone through a whole load of, rounds and rounds and rounds of popular vote. We just kind of just sort of pluck someone from nowhere and just put them out there. And then we don't really support them or give them any, they didn't have any exploding flames like the Italians. They didn't have tight trousers. They didn't have high heels. Where was all the sort of, hairspray? I mean, if you're going to go for it, go for it. We can't just sort of show up, sort of warble a song, a perfectly nice song. It's just, because the Eurovision Song Contest is not really about music, it's about showmanship.
Well, of course, last year, the poor guy who was supposed to represent us, James, what's his name, who did this year, his song was called My Last Breath, which was a little bit inappropriate, I would have thought, given the timing. But Polly Toynbee, very quickly from you.
I watched it to the very end with my little granddaughters. It was their big treat to stay up all night, as far as they were concerned, to watch it. I think we should send whoever is most dispensable, because they're going to get absolutely knocked about because the whole world hates us. So let's send Boris Johnson out there. He did this to us. He's made us so universally loathed. So let him go and take the rap. I wouldn't put any poor singer out there.
It does say something that Russia and Israel came in the top half and we came bottom, I suppose. But we did have a terrible song. Let's all admit that. It was the worst song on the night. Right, that is us done. Diane Abbott, Sarah Vine, Brandon Lewis and Polly Toynbee, thank you so much for joining us. Tomorrow we have with us on Cross Question from 8, Simon Heffer, Yasmin Alabai-Brown, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Tobias Elwood. And of course you can catch up on the podcast as well. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 9:03.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Belarusian journalist who was arrested on board a Ryanair flight which was forced to divert yesterday says he's cooperating with investigators. In a video on social media, Roman Protasevich says he's been treated correctly. EU leaders will meet to discuss sanctions over the forced landing of the flight heading for Lithuania. Here's EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen.
There is a £3 billion